Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to the Circling Seattle Sports podcast. We have another interview for you. It is another softball interview. It's been a while. Last time I did one of these was with Morgan Flores. Great to get these back, and especially considering the time period that this is being recorded in. We're kind of in the really not, I wouldn't say too early going, but we're in softball season. So I appreciate you taking time to do this. This is the 142nd episode of the show itself and the 41st installment of the Seattle interview series. I am joined today by Brooke Nelson, UW pitcher and first baseman, member of the, so you're going to have to correct me on this one. It's the first Bonney Lake High School championship ever or softball championship ever?
Softball championship.
Okay, softball. I was like, that's even doubly impressive if both.
Yeah.
Gatorade Player of the Year, 3A State Player of the Year, NFCA All-American Scholar Athlete last season, Pac-12 Academic Honor Roll, and UW Junior. I'll just get to the base. I mean, how are you doing right now? I know it's an off day for you, so I don't know how much of an off day you consider it with training and everything. And but how is it going so far? Obviously play some really talented teams early on in some of these challenges, but I'm sure it's just great to be back in softball season in general.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me. It's been good. We've gotten to see a lot of cool places. We went to Mexico. That was my first time going to Mexico. And then we went to Florida. We just came back from California. And then we leave on Thursday for Vegas. So the preseason is definitely a grind just because it's a stretch of time where you're not at home, you're always on the go, you're racking up your Alaska Airlines miles, but it's good. It's good to, get the team rolling, play some games against other people versus just scrimmaging each other all fall, but it's been good.
Yeah, it's always, nothing can replicate game speed. And I'm sure that's the same when you've got a program like UW that's always ranked relatively high. You want to keep, iron sharpens iron. At the end of the day, you look at all the teams that have been ranked, so I mean it's something too, especially considering what's happening in baseball. And I'll talk about that later, I'm sure, because coverage of softball is out there. If there's no Major League Baseball, there's softball. So we'll get back to we'll go back to beginnings here. There's some athletic history in your family. Your father Ed played football at the university. Your sister played with you on that state title team we talked about. Your mom played basketball and softball at Tacoma Community College. What influence did your family play on your sports journey taking off? Whether it was, hey, we want you to come out and play these sports, or hey, whatever you want to do, we will encourage it. How did that come into play, and what influence did they have on your sports career?
Yeah, I mean, sports was always kind of a thing in our family, and my sister and I were only 2 years apart, so some years we would play together, some years we wouldn't. So it was always a juggling act by my parents trying to get us to all different things, but they didn't necessarily force, you're going to play softball because your mom played softball. It was kind of a, hey, we enjoy sports, but ultimately, whatever you take interest in and enjoy, go for it. Like, we'll support you. I kind of tried everything when I was younger. I tried basketball. I tried tennis. I swam. I tried gymnastics. My flexibility didn't last long. But then once I got into middle school, I played, it was the 4 short seasons in middle school. So I played volleyball, I played softball, basketball, and soccer. And then once I got into high school, then I narrowed it down to kind of just volleyball and softball. When I was in high school, I actually also wanted to play club volleyball, but there just wasn't enough hours in the day to play it, So I played, I would go to volleyball camps at UW, but I played club softball like all throughout middle school, high school. I played pretty local to start out. I played for the Washington Acers out of Auburn till I was about 14. And then I played 1 year of Team Seattle, which was kind of a unique little environment, as it was ran by the UW coaches. So it was kind of, I wouldn't necessarily call it a loophole in the recruiting, on the old recruiting rules, but because they were able to work with you until you were 14, and then it was considered a recruiting violation if they worked with you older than that. So I played 1 year of that, and then I aged out. So then I played 3 years for the Northwest Bullets out of Oregon. But it was cool to be able to play high school softball with my sister. I mean, I think high school softball is just its own experience in and of itself. It's just so unique. just because everyone's from the same hometown. You're not necessarily drafting players like you are kind of for club teams. So that was the first time in a while that my sister and I had been able to play. And so it was special, one, for my parents to be able to watch us play together, because I think the last time was when we were super young playing rec ball. So that was special because she's now playing, she's a freshman at Linfield down in Oregon playing softball. So that was special to be able to play together, and let alone win a state championship together.
So you touched perfectly on the other sports involvement question there. I mean, did you ever consider taking, volleyball? I'm sure was the one maybe that was like second in the running behind softball, right? Did that ever say, hey, maybe I want to take this into college? Or was it softball was kind of tunnel visioned, none of them really stacked up?
I definitely thought about it. I think that I enjoyed both equally. But I think I had just devoted so much more time to softball. Like all of the private lessons were softball, all of the big exposure camps and tours and research was towards softball. So I think as I got older, I think I just started to, hey, I think this is really where I want to go with this. But, now, what am I, 3 years out of playing volleyball? It's definitely something that I miss. I don't know if I necessarily regret not playing it in college, but it's definitely something that I miss playing.
Well, and then if you ever want to, get back into at least watching it, we got a good program here at UW.
Absolutely. No, it's been fun to be able to be on the other side of it and kind of watch.
But it is always interesting to see, I feel like it's hard nowadays to find an athlete, a good amount of athletes that are just always one sport. It just doesn't really happen, it seems. And it's always kind of cool to say, hey, I thought about volleyball, right? Just to see that what could have changed things. So I'm sure you've been asked about it a lot, but can you take a look at some of the key moments of that 13-inning state championship game, the longest state championship game ever, for the time being? What are you thinking? Because obviously just 7 innings is a decent amount of time, especially in the state title game. If you're thinking about it, if you don't somehow tune that out, that it's a title game, right? But it's 13, with that pressure on. I mean, what are some of the key points in that game for you?
Yeah. I mean, even before the game happened, it was kind of a grind just to get there. The game prior, I think we were playing Mount Si, and it was kind of an early morning game, and it was a pretty low scoring game. So as a pitcher, that's like stressful in and of itself, just because you've got very little leeway, just because it was two really good pitchers going at it. And I remember I can't remember if it was the 6th or 7th inning, but I remember I want to say it was my sister hitting me in, or vice versa. Like either I hit my sister in or my sister hit me in. So it was a very last minute 1-run end of the game to kind of, I can't remember if it was a walk-off, but it was pretty close enough to where it was like, okay, we need to score, or, we're not going to make it to the state championship game. Because the way that the WIAA tournament is structured is, once you lose, you're not necessarily out, but you're out of the first and second place running. You just have a chance to go for third and fourth. So it's not necessarily like the collegiate championship where you can kind of battle your way up to the championship. So that was huge. And then I remember scoring that run, and it was kind of, okay, now we had a pretty decently long break. So we play the tournament over in Lacey, Washington. So I remember just going to the parking lot, and everyone was we all kind of took a deep breath, just because it was just a very high intensity game. It was one of those days where everyone from the school came out, the principal and all your friends from school, and, everyone was there. So it was like, holy crap. Okay, we're going to the state championship game. The program's never been there before. So we kind of took a debrief. And then once we found out, okay, we're going to place in a home match, then it was like, okay, I'm going to play future teammate Sammy Reynolds. And so it was like, kind of as a pitcher, it was, okay, let me start to understand, who am I going against? I knew we were going to face Bailey Greenlee, who I believe is at Southern Alabama, I think now. And so it was we hadn't played them before. But I remember going into it, it was a high emotion competitive game before the game even started. I remember warming up. It was it was just very competitive, even in pregame, and you were taking your pregame ground balls. It was super, super competitive. And then getting into it, I guess the best way to describe it is it was just a very high emotion game. There was the ups and the downs, and there was close calls that totally changed the momentum of the game. But I think the pivotal point was when we got just an international tiebreaker, and because you'll start with a runner on second, no outs. And so as a pitcher, 9 times out of 10, the team's going to bunt. So they're going to sacrifice the batter to get the runner over to third and then have 1 out, runner on third. So it was just, okay, how, as a pitcher, how can I know they're going to bunt. How can I either have her miss the bunt, have her pop up the bunt? Okay. Or if it's fast back to me, can I go for the runner at 3, going to 3? And so I remember we went several innings of either nobody scored, or one score. So that was like, I think it was stressful just because it was so many innings of international tiebreaker. And even when you're batting, it's like, okay, they've already scored 1. We have to score, otherwise it's game over. And then I just remember once it got into like the 10th, the 11th, the 12th, it was like, oh my gosh, guys, we need to score 1 more run than they do. Like, everyone's getting tired. But I think that's just when the emotion and the competitiveness got brought up from everyone. So it was kind of cool to see girls that they weren't necessarily overly emotional, overly competitive. So it kind of brought out a different side of everyone.
Yeah, I mean, just I can only imagine, that many innings in a title game. Bailey Greenlee, yes, at Alabama State, check that. But no, it's God, should be a part of that. It's always something that's really cool to look at, and it's always nice too when someone that I speak with is from the state, so I know, hey, Snohomish, I know where that is. But geez, makes me miss seeing it in person. So excited for when you guys come back here is what I'm getting at. You stepped on you spoke on the Northwest Bullets. Can you talk a little bit about your time, playing club with them and what you might have picked up in your time there, just along your journey?
Yeah. So after I aged out of Team Seattle, that was actually the first year that I went into the summer, like, not knowing who I was going to play with, because I played locally for the Acers all my life. And it was just, okay, I'm going to play another year with you. Okay. And then I'm going to advance to this coach. And then, hey, I'm going to go try out for Team Seattle. Got this. Cool. But then it was okay, crap, what the heck do I do? And so that was actually JT Domingo, who was coaching. He used to coach at UW. Now he coaches at University of Georgia. He actually had connections with the 2 head coaches. And so I did the whole tryout forms and everything for like 3 or 4 different teams. And that was actually the first trial that I went to. And it was intimidating at first, just because it was like, okay, let's get in the car for 3 hours and let's go ahead and drive to this tryout. But I remember getting there, and I think I was there for maybe 20-30 minutes. And I remember looking at my dad going, hey, this is who I want to play for. Like, let me cross my fingers and hope they offer me a spot, but this is who I want to play for. I just remember the environment being very, very similar to Team Seattle, and very, very similar to what I liked in UW. The practices were you were always going, when you were taking infield ground balls, you were doing crossfire. So there was 2 coaches hitting at once versus just 1. So there was very little standing around. There was a lot of purpose behind everything that we did, which was something that I admired. And I also liked that I was the youngest on the team. So it was kind of, my first year, I actually played with Pat Moore on the Bullets, who's a pitcher here at UW now. So for me, I think it was huge developmentally, just being able to grow behind these other bigger, stronger players who had been in the program longer. And so, I came in and I wasn't the best. I wasn't the top pitcher. I wasn't a starter, but then it was, okay, how do you like compete your butt off to get up there to kind of become one of those starters? And so, like you said earlier, just iron sharpens iron.
So continuing with that, you talk about UW. Obviously, UW as well documented as a school that it seemed like, hey, this is where I'm going,
Yeah.
right? Especially on the UW athletics site for you, it's just, hey, it doesn't seem like there's anywhere else. Did other schools recruit you? Was there ever another visit or interest in another school, or was it just, hey, I know where I'm going, I'm going to work towards it? None of anybody else can impact that decision.
Yeah. I mean, I knew I definitely wanted to go to UW, but something that my parents always encouraged is just go explore other places so that you know for sure this is what you want, versus if you just put your blinders up and you go to UW, like you didn't compare it to anything else. So I took visits to Oregon State. I took visits to Arizona State, to Utah. My final two actually came down to UW and Baylor over in Texas. So I took the whole official visit and everything. I went and saw there, and that was first time going to Texas, kind of first time hearing about Baylor. Obviously beautiful private school, a lot of money. It was just a completely different environment for me, just culturally. So it was cool. The visit was actually pretty unique. I actually stayed with one of the current, well, she just graduated, but I stayed in her apartment with her. So it was kind of like I was totally in the shoes of a Baylor softball student athlete. So that was, I think, just looking back on it, that was a cool visit just to go on. You went to the football game, you watched practice, you did all that stuff. But it kind of came down to the two, and it just went back to, I'm big on family, and so I don't have any family over in Texas. The farthest family is California, so not super far, but I definitely wanted to be close to family, and playing for my hometown is always something that I've kept near and dear to my heart, and it's kind of been important to me. So no bad things to say about them. It's just so far away from home.
And that's a really good segue, actually, as we move into UW. I know that I see it more, I guess, in the football aspect of it. There's, the hashtag that they use a lot, that loyal to the soil hashtag, and a lot of recruits that are, we've got a lot of talent in the Metro League here. It's always, stay home and be that guy. In basketball, they want a lot of guys to stay home, be that guy. Obviously, across all sports, I'm sure it's, hey, stay home. You touched on it a bit there, but can you talk about the importance for you to stay home and just represent the Pacific Northwest? Because obviously there's been some people who are a little, hey, how come this recruit goes to, some other school, as opposed to how come you couldn't recruit them to stay here? Obviously that's their own choice, and that's their own thing as an athlete. I went to high school with a guy who plays at Duke now, and he had the choice of going wherever he wanted to go, right? I went to school with Paulo Banchero. He's probably going to be a top pick. So I was just like, hey, I would love for you to go to UW. But at the same time, if you hold offers, that is your decision, right?
Yeah.
What made it for you, I guess? I guess what factored in that decision? Hey, I want to, obviously family is big, but what other things could have played an impact in that?
I think growing up, just like the idea and like characteristic of loyalty has always been like important to us. I mean, even growing up from K through 12 school, like we lived in one spot. We didn't transfer schools. We didn't move a whole bunch. So it wasn't like I went to a whole bunch of different schools. Like we just, whatever school you lived in their district, that's the school you went to where I had friends that would try and transfer into this district because this sport was better. It was kind of, here's what I'm working with and how can I make like the best of it. And I think part of it is just, I grew up around the university. Dad was a walk-on on the football team. Mom played locally. They both went to Lincoln High School out of Tacoma. And I grew up coming to UW games. My parents had season tickets when we were in the old season or in the old stadium. So I grew up 6 months old and a little baby Bjorn going to football games. So it was just kind of something that I had grown up around. And I think Coach Tar said it once that we're just kind of a hidden gem in the corner of the US. So it's just something that I'm proud of, and proud to like ride the highs and the lows of the university. Even looking at like the football team, just I'm going to be a Husky fan, whether they're first in the pack, last in the pack. Obviously you want them to be first in the pack, but it's just, I guess, goes back to the idea of like loyalty.
Well, that definitely makes sense. Obviously, again, it's at the end of the day, if you're recruiting at a position, that's your decision. That's your life that you're going to be impacting. But that's kind of how it's been for me. I grew up around the university, just kind of made sense. I was like, hey, I looked at other places similar to you, and it was just like, it just makes the most sense here.
Yeah.
And even to look at, like you were saying with football, might not have been easiest last season, but we had
Sure.
like volleyball was great.
Sure.
Softball has been great, as I talked to you about before we started this, so yeah, I mean, the highs and lows are there, but at the end of the day, then, I mean, like, if we're looking at the university itself, the numbers kind of show it's a great university.
Yep.
So hey, if others don't know about it necessarily, that's potentially their loss.
Yep.
So talking about the last few years, obviously the shortened season, I'm sure, is not one that maybe you look back at with anything positive. But is there anything memory wise that you have taken from that shortened season? Obviously, after that kind of thing ended, something else came about that, and I'll talk about that after softball. But what do you take from that shortened season? Because if you look at it record wise, it's not like UW was slowing down.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it was a one of a kind experience. And I don't know how many, I mean, it's weird. You could take it as the good, you could take it as the bad, but I think it's a one of a kind experience that ultimately only 4 classes of athletes are ever going to get to experience. And so it was, I actually think that our freshman class actually had the most unique experience, just because it was our first time everything, you started your first 2 quarters, super normal, cool, love college, going to get in person, living in the dorms. And then I actually remember the day it happened. We had just finished all of our preseason, and we were just at home. I believe it was the Wednesday during the week, and we were going to host Open Pac-12 against Utah that Friday. And that was the year that the Olympics were originally supposed to happen. So Team USA softball was going on their stand beside her tour. So basically that was part of their route of training for the Olympics. They would go around to all these top collegiate softball teams, and for exposure, fans being able to get to meet, but they would play a college team on a Thursday typically. And then I don't know if they would have some sort of camp, they would have meet and greets. So we were pumped, we were going to get to face Monica Abbott and Kat Osterman and all these big time Olympic medalists. And then they had actually arrived in Seattle. We had just set up their locker room. Each player wrote notes to, I had Kehlani Ricketts. And so each player had connected with an Olympian, future Olympian, and they had just gotten settled down. We had just finished practice in the Dempsey. They were walking over to the north side of the Dempsey to get their practice. And I remember going back to the dorms, and we got a phone call, and it said, hey, Team USA just left. We're not actually going to play them. We're like, what do you mean we're not going to play them? We literally just saw them 30 minutes ago in the Dempsey. And I was like, okay, well, that's a huge bummer. We were all looking forward to that. It was sold out months before. And then it was, all right, whatever, get over it. We got Utah. Let's go practice, whatever. Hey, actually, we're not going to play Utah. Sorry. That's not going to happen. We're like, what do you mean that's not going to happen? Okay, whatever. We go practice. We keep going. And then I remember sitting down in a team meeting, and it was, hey, we're actually not going to have a season. And we're like, what do you mean? And that was right before it had become public to UW Athletics had released their press statement. Maybe, I don't know, 12, 20 hours before it happened. And so I remember Coach Glasso saying, I have no idea what's going to happen, but I would, from a dad perspective, I would encourage you guys to get somewhere physically where you're okay staying there for several months. So if that means going home, if that means if you're comfortable staying in your Seattle house for several months, cool. But but he's like, as a dad, I would want my kids to come home. And so that was, everyone kind of picked up their stuff, and it was like, head on home to Bonney Lake. Teammates went home to Australia and Texas and Georgia and wherever the heck they're from. And so that was a weird dynamic, just because being a spring sport, you are always playing in the spring. No matter how old you are, the spring is go time. And so sitting at home, having class at home, not doing anything in the spring was a once in a lifetime, I guess, experience, just because you're playing, but you're not in the spring. So that was funky. But I remember coming back, and it was, for the three of us, Kelly, Jadelyn, and I, it was kind of a funky dynamic, because it's, okay, academically we're sophomores, but really this is our first kind of go around. So it was kind of, just kind of thinking on last year, it was unique just because, okay, we got our foot in the water, we got our jitters per se out. We've done this before, but we haven't done this before. Okay, we've done preseason twice, but we've never done pack once. So I think it was an interesting dynamic. You're able to learn, you're able to grow before you really got going into conference and postseason. And so I think it was, I guess, a blessing in disguise, just being able to play with some of those players for multiple years. I think of Morgan Flores, who now is like one of my best friends. If she would have never torn her ACL, we would have never played together, period. Okay, so then she tore ACL, then she redshirted, then we get to play together 1 year. Well, then COVID hit. She's grandma here for a 6th year. Then I get to play with her for 2 years. So it was, I guess, a blessing in disguise, just, being able to kind of put pause on your season and continue to grow and learn on what you've experienced for a couple months. But then being able to play with Morgan for 2 years, and Sis for 2 years, and Taryn Atley for 2 years, and all those players. So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but
without it, I would have known none of that. So,
Yeah.
Absolutely. No, it is kind of interesting you say that, because I'm first 2 quarters of UW, yes, somewhat normal. Then we get to that 1 quarter, and I remember a good amount of my friends that go to different universities like Wazoo. I had a friend that goes to Syracuse. They're all home, and we're on a call, and I'm on Twitter, and I read the NBA season has been suspended. I go,
Yeah.
That seems like a big deal.
Yeah.
And now, but no, that story, just, hey, we just saw them. What do you mean we're not playing? That is, I can only imagine, what that can be like, so obviously I'm sure that's terrible, but, I appreciate you sharing that. With you talking about the facility, what are your thoughts on the new facility itself? I know that's kind of been a big deal. I'm sure it's kind of like, oh, we've gotten used to it by now, maybe. How is that for you? Because obviously before then it was, I'm sure, talking to a friend of mine who plays on this women's soccer team, it's like, oh, we have to share time in Dempsey, and struggling to even get that. I think there were photos last season from the Twitter that it was like, oh, UW softball's training in Dempsey, and you can see other people training in the back. It's like, this is a top tier program. You'd like them to have a top tier facility.
Absolutely.
How what are your thoughts on the facility itself?
Just looking at it, it's beautiful, and I think it's long overdue for our program, but I think it's the best thing that could have ever happened, because you're right. We would practice in the Dempsey mid-afternoon, and we'd practice on the north end. Baseball or soccer would practice on the south end, and you've got track and field running around on the ends, and then you've got the jumpers on the far end, and you've got your pole vaulters, and you've got everyone going on. So there was just a lot of things going on, and like you said, it was hard for any sport to kind of utilize the best that they could with their practice. But I think the best thing that it's provided us is just the extra work. Because prior, okay, hey, swing feels kind of funky, I want to go hit. Okay, 2 years ago it was, okay, you can't really hit. The Dempsey's being used until our practice time, and then right after you've got XYZ going on. Okay, well, let me go hit outside. Okay, hold on, it's 43 degrees out and your bat's gonna break. So that was just kind of a there was the will and the desire to do all of this extra work, but there wasn't really the capacity or the space to do so. So that's been the biggest blessing. And I think that there's there's always someone in there in the best way possible. So now it's 3 cages. So pitchers and catchers have been able to throw bullpens prior to practice. That way, during practice, we could be athletes. It's allowed hitters to go in on their own time and hit. We've now got a machine that's kind of a self feeder. So you can it's got kind of a big bucket almost, and it cycles through and it throws one ball in. And you can actually set up the machine you can adjust the wheels and the speed of the wheels to be a curve, be a drop, be a rise, be a change.
Oh, wow.
So you can actually go in there on your own and just set it up to how you want it, and then just self feed it, and you can go hit the machine by yourself and mimic what you're going to see this weekend. So that's been huge.
That's been, with that facility being built, I remember, I guess my friend showed me around the facilities a bit, and I was like, whoa, the softball facility is huge,
Yeah.
But also, covering like with the Sounders and the rain here in Seattle, the rain obviously now being able to play up here in Seattle at Lumen Field instead of playing on a baseball stadium in Tacoma. Don't get me wrong, Cheney Stadium is fine, but you should probably be playing soccer on a soccer field.
Yes.
And then hopefully with them as well, but the Sounders, getting their own training facility, I'm sure can only improve that, because kind of in a similar way, playing down in Starfire, it's like, okay, you've got, obviously it's Starfire, there's other fields, but you've got kids that are playing, you've got the Seattle Seawolves rugby team that's playing, juggling all that, as a pro team as a team that wants to get better and maintain their standing, whether it's being ranked high or trying to win championship or both. Having that, I'm sure, is just something that is a huge help and should be there, at minimum, right? So you talked about someone going back to Australia when everybody went back home. I'm sure there's a certain person that you're talking about. I asked Morgan the same thing, as obviously being a catcher, catching her is one thing, but also someone to be a fellow pitcher, I'm sure, is another as well. What can you describe about Gabbie Plain through your point of view? I know that obviously the numbers are huge and she's a big name in the softball game, but also I had some frustrations because I consume a lot of the Seattle media because it's what I do, right? There was one outlet that during the great run last year, and I think it was during the Michigan series or any of the Michigan games, they're like, why is she smiling so much? Which is like, why are you worried about that when she's winning so much? Right. You get stuff like that is why I talked to you about not wanting to have like clickbait, and I'm going to cross the swearing guideline, clickbait bullshit. It's just, who gives a shit if she's winning games, right? So that's how I was frustrated with that outlet. But Gabbie Plain, obviously, incredible athlete. How is she through your eyes? Because obviously I'm sure she's just a teammate to you, right? It's just, there's nothing, I hold her in this high regard, this is my teammate, I maybe don't treat her any differently.
Yeah, I mean, her stats are stats, like anyone can look up her stats, but I think being able to like know her as a person, to play with her, to actually live with her, I think her stats speak for themselves, but I think her personality, just as a human being, is far greater than any stat that she could produce. It's funny that you mentioned the smirking, because from an outsider's perspective, like, I don't know, maybe you catch a game or two and like that's what you see. 9 times out of 10, people will think that, she's the cockiest one on the field, and that like could not be farther opposite. And I think, I guess I don't even think that she has a reason to the smirk, but I think the biggest thing that she'll pass on to us other pitchers is like, it's just a game. It's just a pitch. Like, there's no need to overthink it. And so I think she, by just her smirking and smiling, it uplifts the whole team, but it also just reminds the rest of us pitchers, like, it's okay. It's fine. Like, it happens. And I think even just learning like her culture and her language and just her different lingo that she brings, a lot of times, as pitchers, you'll throw the right pitch, you'll get the right swing, but Even thinking like, okay, on a little changeup, you'll get a little blooper that goes between the 5-6 hole and the left fielder. So it's like, okay, as a pitcher, you're like, dang it, I did everything I could have, and it fell in for a hit. Was it really a hit? Not really. Did it fall in for a hit? Yes. And so it just goes back to her saying like, hey, unlucky, mate. Like, it's just unlucky, as pitchers, there's balls that are just unlucky. Like, you did your job, whatever. Like, how can you just go get the next one? But I think it's just been cool and unique to just learn from her, pick her brain, just being able to throw a bullpen and just get feedback from her.
I mean, that's you talk about, might think she's cocky as all hell, right? But that's totally the opposite of what I've heard, either heard from Morgan or read from several other players, right?
Yeah.
Just, that even watching the World Series games last year, it was like with that smirk on, it's like, yes, she's smiling, big deal. Talk about the pitch, please.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, that kind of stuff. I'm sure, as an athlete, you might hear stuff like that, but it's like, hey man, another person that you may, and you've already spoke about her, that's been able to stay around the program. What's it like for you to still have Sis Bates around? And whether is it kind of odd to not see her out on the field with you? Or is it just great to have her in that capacity, and just still being around the program?
I mean, I think it's all of the above. It's odd having her around, but not being able to play with her. But I think it's one of the greatest things that could have ever happened for our program, for her own developmental as a player, being able to, they say, the greatest mastery of any skill is being able to teach it to another person. So it's a great blessing for her just to be able to pass her wisdom on, as our middle infield is young this year, being able to learn from, a fifth-year senior who's done it all, been everywhere. And I think she's transitioned really, really well into player sis to coach sis. It's definitely bus rides. It's weird having her in the front, not the back. It's weird having her not in the locker room, but I think she's done a really, really good job of, hey, I'm still your friend, but I'm also now your coach. And I think everyone's adapted to that really well. And hey, you're our coach now. Yes, you're a friend, but you're also our coach. And that's not an easy dynamic for anyone to step into. But I think it's, her so recently being in the program and still playing, and so recently playing, it's a unique opportunity to be able to like ask questions, and she could put herself in that moment just because it's been so recently. And I think it's been cool just how she's worked with some of our middle infielders. Sometimes at practice, like when we're hitting fungo, she'll kind of mirror them. So she'll go behind the infielder without a glove, and she'll attack the ball like she would and assess, okay, did the infielder, they don't know what I'm doing, I'm behind them. But ideally, if they could attack the ball the same way, like check that box. So I think it's been really good developmentally for just our infielders to be able to grow from her.
And you talk about that, obviously, with some younger athletes in that middle infield. I'm sure that's just as invaluable as it can get, right?
Absolutely.
I'm kind of interested, with the tournaments that always kind of take place in the beginning of the season. You talk about going to, I believe it was Mexico, right?
Yeah.
And even like with St. Pete's, there's a lot of girls and young women who come out to those games, and I'm sure look up to you guys. And it's always really cool to see the photos. I think there was one that the NCAA put out where it's like it was a bunch of different teams signing bottles, or just signing autographs. Can you talk about that? I mean, as someone who is in those shoes, as a player who might be looked up to, right, as a woman in that spot, what impact that might leave? Because on WNBA Twitter, I see all the time, it's like young fans in their jerseys and say the WNBA is so important. And that, I'm sure that goes for every women's sport, right? So, I mean, can you talk about just, I guess, some of the things or the impact that you want to leave behind in these places where it's like, hey, I want to be able to look at these girls and say, if you want to play softball, you can do it. And just the encouragement, and that obviously anywhere, if you want to be a pro, like an athlete, you can do that because of, I mean, just whether it's looking at you, looking at UW, looking at these teams that are playing. I guess if you can, I've just kind of dropped a whole mess there, but I guess if you can get what I'm saying there with just
Yeah, no,
visiting those
that's,
places.
I think this is the favorite question you asked me, just because it circles back to kind of my why of playing. Like when I was little, I was that little girl. I was the little girl that stayed after trying to get my poster or my ball or my hat, whatever, signed by all these girls. I was the girl that would have the little roster card and would try and find all the players on the field. Like I was that little girl. I did have the dreams of being where I am now. So being able to transition into that role, it's just a dream becoming a reality. And so again, that goes back like my why of playing and continuing to play softball and wanting to continue to play it beyond college is to kind of inspire the next generation. And so even looking at, games when we've got autographs after, sometimes players, they'll good game, bad game, whatever, parents there, parents not there, they'll want to just go home after the game. And so that being part of my why, like I'll go straight from the game, stay in my uniform, go out there, and I won't go back to the locker room until every little girl has got at least one signature, has been taken care of, just because I know being that little girl waiting after the whole game, a 7-inning game when you're 8 is long, and so you waited all that time to see your favorite player, and then it's like, oh, I didn't get to see them. And then you're like heartbroken going back. And even it was the same thing when we were in Mexico. We actually us and Memphis softball ran a youth clinic for some of the local kids in the area. So it tested my high school Spanish, because most of them knew very little English, and a couple of our players are, I won't say fluent, but mildly fluent in Spanish. So it was a pretty cool experience to be able to grow the game internationally. But again, it goes back to the teaching the younger generation, and we actually taught it. We did the camp before we had played any of the games. So a lot of the players that went to the camp then came to all the games. And I remember our very, very last game versus Arkansas, it was that night game. And after we finished, we had our little team huddle. They gave out the tournament awards. You just kind of look to your left and you see all these little boys and girls and their brothers and their sisters and their moms and their dads just kind of sitting there with their balls and their Sharpies, like ready to go. And same sort of thing. Some people want to get back to the hotel, and that's just not necessarily part of their why, which is fine for them. But I remember it was actually Jadelyn and I that were kind of the last two, and it was, sure, are we hungry? Yes. Sure. Do we stink and we want to get out of our uniforms? Yes. But when again are we going to be able to sit here and interact with these little kids from Mexico? When are they going to have this opportunity again? Probably never. And so it's, how can we stay there and give back to the game that's, I guess, given so much to us? And I think that's a big blessing with NIL, just because I take a high regard in coaching and growing the game in the state of Washington. It goes kind of back to that loyalty aspect. But I just think even growing up in Washington and playing softball in Washington, there's developmentally, for whatever reason, and I'm not sure why, we're a little lower or farther behind than big producing states like California and Texas. And so it's like, okay, going through all of this, how can I coach the next generation with, these proper skill sets, with these proper, X, Y, and Z. And so once NIL came, I was able to, well, I guess pre-NIL, I was able to legally give lessons, but I couldn't advertise myself. I couldn't create my own business. I couldn't, I could give it as long as I report it, but there was no advertising piece. And so as soon as NIL started, I started my own, I wouldn't even call it a business, but I started my own, like, I guess you'd call it a business, like a pitching business. And so I work with a lot of youth here in Seattle. And then when I'm at home, work with a lot of youth back there. But this winter, Megan Vandegrift and I we ran over our 2-week break. So you've got your Christmas in there, you've got your New Year's and all that. But between the extra days, we actually put on 24 hours worth of camp. So it wasn't 24 hours straight, but it was 12 different locations for 2 hours. And so that was huge. So we were able to touch on the pitching, the catching, the offense, the defense. And then the last part, we spent 30 minutes and kind of worked on the mental game. And each girl, for signing up and participating, they got a big signed poster from Megan and I. And so that was even just getting feedback from some of the girls. Most of them were shy, but some of the parents, some of the coaches, like that was huge for them. Like just being able to interact one-on-one with local players that they look up to. And that's always something that they've wanted. And that's always something that we wanted to do, but it wasn't able to happen until this law was recently passed.
Yeah. And I know that's to look at that, talk with NIL specifically, it's been really cool. I know that there was an event a little bit ago. I think it was around this. Yeah, it must have been December, where they had a bunch. I think it was a group. No, I think it might have been more than 4. There was a group of UW softball players at Duke's on South Lake Union.
Yeah.
And that was really cool because I remember still trying to work on it, but obviously I'm sure like you, she's busy. I remember I had sent an email to Bailey Klingler about an interview, and she was the first person I've ever had reply with capital letters, everything. Oh my God, yes, and 5 exclamation points. That sounds so fun. And I was like, holy, wow. But obviously, again, busy, totally get it. Just to see those people in person is really cool, because obviously until I'm sure in a little bit, it's hard to get those games in person all the time, especially with what's happened recently. And to go back to what you were saying about just trying to pass that along, I'm not in that athlete spot, but with working with the Mariners on game days, whether it's giving cards to kids or just passing anything on I can, or even going to the games and you're there early for autographs and making sure the kids go first. Cause I mean, it's, they're there for, right? It's not, they're going to remember that a lot more than I am. Right.
Yeah.
So just seeing that is always really cool. And I figured I had to talk about that just because, like you said, you don't know when you might see those kids might get that chance again.
Absolutely.
So to pass that on, I think is really cool. I want to transition out of UW here. We're going to wrap up with some stuff outside of softball.
Okay.
Some kind of still tied to it, but most outside. So how have you been able to improve the Off the Dirt podcast since it began? Obviously, I mean, starting a podcast, you're like, oh shoot, how do I do this? How can I improve that? Right. And just whether it's audio quality or, if you have a video aspect, microphone, camera quality, right?
Yeah.
How have you been able to improve since it began?
Yeah. So that was something that it's kind of funny how it started. So once it goes back to the kind of COVID time. And so we kind of had a meeting as a program. And so it's okay, we're losing a year's worth of putting our program out to the world. We're not on TV, we're not playing all this stuff. So there's a span of, I don't know, was it 8 months or 10 months, whatever it was, where our program's not out there. So how can we still put ourselves out there in a different form? And so some people reached out to donors. Some people queued up with the Facebook and they kind of interviewed some alumni. Some people, there was just a lot of different projects going on, but the podcast was actually my project. And so that was something that I did, I don't know, a couple times, but it was something that I enjoyed doing. So I continued to do it. And so it's been on a little slow pace now that season's gone started, but it's been, I guess, a big learning curve for me, just because, video editing, sound editing, inputting clips, that's something that I had zero experience with. I didn't take any of those digital media classes in high school. So it was kind of figuring it out as I go. But it's been interesting to kind of just kind of like you're doing, just learning the stories of different people. And it's as enjoying as it is for the listeners and the viewers, it's equally as enjoying for you as the one doing the interviews, asking the questions, just getting to hear the different stories from all these different people and kind of how they've become the person that they are today.
I mean, just talking to you about softball, it's filling the void that would have been there with the lockout, and just bringing back, because for the while now, it's just been about, I've been doing with hockey and soccer here and there,
Mhm.
and it just baseball and that similar game was always a first love for me, so bringing that back, it's just like, oh man, kind of makes me want to play again.
Yeah.
I've got a glove for a reason, you know. So I mean, I think you might have talked about it as a whole, but I mean, what have you, I don't know if it's still true, but I know that on the UW page, it was, you were looking into, I think, broadcast, I think, as a major. It could be
Mhm.
wrong.
Mhm.
What have you been able to learn in that field? I mean, since you began college, I know for me, it's kind of funny. I've learned more in the field than I have in classes, and that's fine. That might just be how it
Absolutely.
is. But for you, what have you been able to learn in that field? As especially as someone, I think it was really important what you said in talking about the podcast itself, was that as a player, having that viewpoint, speaking to those athletes, is very important. And I get that. As someone who has never took it to the college level, I won't have that. Um, but like learning, like you were saying, learning from these different athletes, you can kind of pick things here, up, and there. So I guess, what have you been able to take from that field? I mean, since you really started back in your freshman year.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of like you're saying, you've learned more in the field than you have in a class. Like you don't sign up for a class that's Seattle Sports podcast. Like that's just not a thing. So I guess you learn all of these things and like how to create a conversation. That's always my goal when I'll do my podcast. It's how do I create more of a conversation versus an interview? Like you can Google search all these interviews, but how can you just have a flowy conversation? So exactly just like you're doing, like as your interviewee says something, how can you not necessarily close the door and open the door to a next question, but how can you flow and just kind of not necessarily dig deeper, but how can you ask kind of guiding questions based on what they've said? Um, and so still taking interest in wanting to do some sort of sports broadcasting post college, it's an interesting, I'm sure, as you know, it's an interesting field, as you know, just because you kind of have to work your way up the totem pole in the tower. Every once in a while, sure, you'll have the people that they land their dream job right out of the gate, but most people, they work smaller, slowly up to bigger, to wherever they want to be. And so it's definitely something that's been able to give me kind of put my foot in the door, kind of get to experience some things, and even getting to talk to kind of Danielle Laurie, who works for ESPN and the Pac-12 networks right now. I haven't done a podcast with her, but I've talked to her just about the field itself. Getting to talk to Amanda Scarborough, who is works with ESPN right now, and even being able to talk a little bit to Angie Mentek with the Mariners. Yeah, so it's been cool just to hear, players who have, whether they've got a connection to Washington or just softball in general, just their experiences and kind of things that they wish they did, that they're glad they did, all that good stuff.
You mentioned some really great names, because one with Miss Lori, I've been in contact with her, hoping to get her on at some point whenever that's possible, but also being a mother of two and then juggling those broadcasting duties, there's a lot on her plate. So I'd love to get that worked. But also Angie, it's always funny because I don't know how many people know that she played softball. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's been really cool. Like the last season, I know she got in the booth. I don't know if it was for a full game, but she was in the booth for a game and they showed, the stats and all that. And I know a lot of people on Twitter liked her in the booth. So, that, and then also, with Root having Kraken rights,
Mhm.
I remember I spoke with her about it. The Mariners had Ty France night. I spoke with her about the show. Would love to talk to her because I've spoken with Jen Mueller. She said it's kind of up to my bosses. So I'm like, okay, totally get it. But also I remember the second time I saw her, she was like, how's the show going? I'm like, huh? I'm like, how do you remember
Whoa.
that?
Yeah.
So it's, you peek out some good role models there. Just some quick hitters to wrap up here. Is there a favorite sport for you to attend at UW when you've got time, obviously, outside of softball, or even just watch in general?
Volleyball for sure.
That figured that would make sense. And then this is something that I actually, before I started to prep for this, I saw a video on my Instagram Explorer. It was a question in an interview. What is one question that you wish you wouldn't be asked anymore, whether it's something that always kind of pops up that's kind of annoying, or it's just like I hate having to repeat it. Is there one question for you that's like, hey, I really don't want to hear that anymore?
I mean, I think it's just I feel like the question that I'll get, I mean, it's kind of starting to dwindle away as time goes, but when we got ranked 16, and that was the whole little debate, and that was because I had spoken at a couple like donor events, and I had gone to the Husky 100, and like all of those sort of things, and 9 times out of 10 that would get brought up, and it's like, does it really matter? Obviously we were frustrated, but it would always go back to well, why'd you walk out? It's just part of the emotion, and so I guess it's a thing. It happened. Of course, everyone was frustrated, but what can you do about it now? Nothing.
Yeah, I remember when that it goes back to me again with this thing they said about Gabbie and the smile. It's like, who cares? There's obviously a game to be played now. Move on from it. I'm sure they have already moved on from it as soon as that happened, right?
Yeah.
So no, I totally get that, and I thought that was something, especially not only as an athlete but someone who does speak with other people, right? As I'm doing, it's like, hey, there are certain questions you shouldn't be asking, or that these people probably hear way too often. So I know that what was it? I always put social medias in the description. I will link the show down in the description as well, and if you want, I can always put Brooke Nelson Performance in there if you still are using that.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you want to put out into the world, as we're still relatively we haven't even gotten the conference, right? But is there anything that you want to put out into the world?
No, I just think it'll be a fun season. We've got a smaller roster size this year, so even as we've experienced in our Oklahoma State game, like there's going to be a lot of games where just about every single person on the roster gets in the game. So it'll be a fun season, and we're still trying to figure out all of our pieces to our puzzle, but it'll be a fun season, and hopefully we get some full capacity games this year.
Really looking for, I think, shoot, I forgot who it was, but there's that one game. I think there's like one game that's here at UW before you guys go back on the road. I'm like, damn, I forgot who
it's
again.
Robert. I think it's Robert Morris next Tuesday.
That sounds right. Yep. I'm like, damn, just one, but no, really excited for that, and excited to see that in person.
Yeah.
And again, appreciate your time on an off day. I don't know, again, what else you've got going on, whether it's might stop by I don't remember what Coach Tar called it, but I saw it on Twitter. I was like, that's a name for the building.
The Jewel Box.
Yeah, the Jewel Box. I was like, oh, it's a nice looking building. I'll say that.
It kind of goes back to what she said, like hidden gem up in the corner of the
US. There you go. Again, Brooke Nelson, thank you for your time.
Thank you.